We are taught to believe that reality is something solid, something already finished, something that exists independently of us, a universe made of objects, forces, and laws, unfolding mechanically while we simply move through it. But the deeper science looks, and the deeper consciousness turns inward, the more this certainty begins to dissolve. At the most fundamental level, reality no longer behaves like a structure made of things. It behaves like a question that has not yet been answered. A vast, silent openness where form has not fully decided what it wants to be. Quantum physics does not describe a universe of certainty. It describes a universe of probability, where particles do not exist as fixed entities, but as clouds of potential. Nothing is fully real until it is interacted with, until it is observed. And this single fact quietly fractures the old idea of a detached observer standing outside the universe. Observation is not neutral. Observation participates. Reality responds. This is where science unexpectedly brushes against something ancient. Long before equations and laboratories, spiritual tradition spoke of a reality that is not separate from awareness. They spoke of a world that appears through perception, of a self that is not confined to the body, of an intelligence that flows through all things. Quantum physics does not confirm these teachings, but it echoes them in an unsettling way. It suggests that consciousness may not be an accidental byproduct of matter, but something woven into the structure of existence itself. At the quantum level, particles exist in many states at once. They are not here or there. They are not this or that. They are possibilities. Only when measured do they collapse into a single outcome. This collapse is not caused by force, but by interaction, by relationship. And suddenly, reality looks less like a machine and more like a dialogue. A conversation between potential and perception. Spirituality at its deepest level is not about belief. It is about direct experience. It is about noticing that awareness is always present before thought, before identity, before the story of me. When you sit in stillness and observe the mind, thoughts appear and disappear. Emotions rise and fade. Sensations come and go. But awareness itself remains unchanged. It does not move. It does not age. It does not fragment. It simply witnesses. This witnessing presence feels strangely similar to the role of the observer in quantum physics, not because the brain is collapsing wave functions, but because both point toward a reality that is not fully formed without relationship. Without awareness, there is no experience. Without experience, reality has no meaning. The universe may exist as potential, but it becomes a world only when it is perceived. We are conditioned to think of consciousness as something that happens inside the skull, a private phenomenon locked behind the eyes. But this assumption begins to feel fragile when examined closely. Where exactly is consciousness located? Is it in the neurons? In the electrical signals? In the chemical reactions? Or is the brain not the producer of consciousness, but the interface through which consciousness experiences form? Some interpretations of quantum physics suggest that information, not matter, is the fundamental currency of reality. Information does not exist in space the way objects do. It exists relationally. It exists as patterns, correlations, probabilities. Spiritual traditions have long described reality in similar terms, speaking of vibration, frequency, and resonance. Different languages pointing toward the same intuition, that what appears solid is actually movement, and what appears separate is actually connected. Time, too, begins to unravel under both scientific and spiritual scrutiny. In classical physics, time flows forward in a straight line. In quantum physics, time behaves far more strangely. Effects can precede causes. Futures can influence the past. Events exist in superposition, and in deep states of meditation, time dissolves altogether. Minutes disappear. The sense of before and after collapses into a single, expansive now. This suggests something radical. Perhaps time is not a fundamental feature of reality, but a feature of perception. Perhaps consciousness moves through possibility in a way that creates the experience of sequence. The universe may not be unfolding in time. Time may be unfolding in awareness. If this is true, then the spiritual idea of presence becomes more than psychological advice. It becomes a way of aligning with the deepest structure of reality. When attention rests fully in the present moment, it may be resting where reality itself is most alive. Not as memory, not as anticipation, but as pure emergence. The ego, in both spiritual and psychological language, is the structure that insists on separation. It says, I am here. The world is there. It builds identity from memory and fear, from survival and comparison. But this sense of separation becomes unstable when examined through the lens of quantum interconnectedness. Particles that were once connected remain correlated across vast distances. Actions here influence outcomes there. Separation is not as clean as it appears. Spiritual awakening is often described as the realization that the boundary between self and world is not absolute, that the observer and the observed arise together, that consciousness does not belong to the individual, but the individual belongs to consciousness. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a shift in perception so deep that the world itself seems to breathe differently. When you look at a tree, where does the tree end and perception begin? Without awareness, there is no color, no shape, no meaning. The tree exists as potential, But the experience of tree arises only in consciousness. This does not mean the world is imaginary. It means the world is relational. It exists through interaction, not isolation. Quantum physics reveals a universe that cannot be fully described without including the observer. Spirituality reveals a self that cannot be fully understood without dissolving the observer. These two movements appear opposite, but they meet in the same place. The recognition that separation is not fundamental. Suffering often arises from resisting this truth, from clinging to a fixed identity in a fluid universe, from demanding certainty in a reality built on uncertainty. Spiritual traditions teach surrender not as weakness, but as alignment. Quantum physics shows that uncertainty is not a flaw in the universe, but its creative engine. When you stop trying to control every outcome, when you stop demanding that reality conform to expectation, something shifts. Life becomes less rigid, less threatening, more alive. This does not remove pain, but it transforms relationship to pain. Experience flows instead of fractures. Consciousness, in this view, is not something you possess. It is something you participate in. You are not a fragment of awareness trapped in a body. You are awareness expressing itself temporarily as a body. The universe is not outside of you. It is appearing within you, just as you are appearing within it. This realization does not lead to detachment from life. It leads to intimacy with it. Every moment becomes meaningful, not because it is special, but because it is happening at all. Every breath is a collaboration between form and awareness. Every perception is a quiet miracle. The union of spirituality and quantum physics is not found in answers, but in humility. Both reveal that reality is far stranger, deeper, and more subtle than the mind prefers. Both invite us to replace certainty with curiosity, control with attention, fear with presence. You are not here to master the universe. You are here to participate in it, to observe it, to feel it, to allow it to move through you. And in doing so, to realize that the observer you thought you were searching for has always been the space in which the search itself appears. In the end, the deepest truth may not be something you learn, but something you remember. That before identity, before thought, before time, there is awareness, silent, open, infinite, and that this awareness is not separate from the fabric of reality. It is the place where reality becomes real. What makes this realization difficult is not its complexity, but its simplicity. The mind is conditioned to search for answers in accumulation, more information, more concepts, more certainty. Yet both deep spirituality and quantum physics point in the opposite direction. They point toward subtraction, toward the letting go of assumptions, toward the collapse of ideas that once felt solid, just like particles collapse when observed. When you begin to notice awareness itself, rather than the content of awareness, something subtle but irreversible happens. Thoughts lose their authority. Emotions still arise, but they no longer define the whole of experience. Identity loosens its grip. You begin to sense that what you truly are is not moving through life. Life is moving through you. Quantum fields exist everywhere, even in what appears to be empty space. The vacuum is not empty. It is alive with fluctuation, with energy constantly appearing and disappearing. Spiritual traditions have long spoken of this same paradox. The void that is not nothingness, the emptiness that contains everything. What science calls the quantum vacuum, mystics call the source. This suggests that creation is not an event that happened once in the distant past. Creation is happening now, constantly. Reality is not being sustained, it is being recreated moment by moment, and awareness may be the doorway through which this recreation becomes experience. If reality is continually emerging, then you are not trapped inside a fixed story. You are not bound to repeat the past endlessly. The future is not predetermined. Possibility is real, not as fantasy, but as structure. The universe itself is built on openness, not certainty. This is why attention matters so deeply. Where attention rests, reality organizes itself, not magically, not through wishful thinking, but through relationship. Attention shapes experience. It selects from the field of potential what becomes lived reality. In this sense, awareness is not passive. It is creative. Spiritual practices like meditation are often misunderstood as attempts to escape the world. In truth, they are ways of learning how reality actually functions. When attention becomes steady and quiet, perception deepens. Subtleties emerge. You begin to feel the interconnectedness that was always present but ignored by speed and noise. The more still awareness becomes, the more fluid reality appears. Certainty dissolves. Fixed beliefs soften. What once felt rigid begins to breathe. This can feel disorienting at first, because the ego depends on predictability. But beyond that discomfort lies a sense of trust. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in process. Quantum physics shows us that measurement freezes possibility into form. Spirituality shows us that identification freezes awareness into identity. Both point to the same insight. Fixation limits reality. Openness allows it to unfold. Suffering often intensifies when we try to lock reality into shapes it cannot hold. When we insist that life must follow expectation, that identity must remain consistent, that meaning must be permanent. But impermanence is not a flaw. It is the signature of a living universe. When you stop resisting impermanence, a different relationship to life emerges. Moments are no longer judged solely by outcome. They are experienced for what they are. Presence replaces anxiety. Curiosity replaces fear. Participation replaces control. This does not mean passivity. It means alignment. Action still happens, but it flows from clarity rather than tension. Choices arise from awareness rather than reaction. Life feels less like a struggle against reality and more like a conversation with it. In this conversation, silence becomes as important as sound. Stillness becomes as meaningful as movement. What is not said becomes as powerful as what is spoken. Awareness learns to listen to reality rather than impose upon it. Quantum entanglement reveals that distance is not an absolute barrier. Particles separated by vast space remain connected, influencing each other instantaneously. Spiritually, this suggests that separation itself may be a surface illusion. At depth, everything remains in relationship. If this is true, then compassion is not a moral rule imposed from outside. It is a recognition of structure. To harm another is to disturb the same field you arise from. To care for another is to care for the larger system that includes you. Identity, seen through this lens, becomes lighter. You still function as an individual, but you no longer feel isolated. You recognize yourself as a temporary expression of something far larger, something that existed before you and will continue after you dissolve. Death, then, loses some of its terror, not because the body will not end, but because what you truly are was never confined to form. Just as a wave rises and falls without leaving the ocean, experience arises and dissolves without leaving awareness. This does not need to be believed. It can be felt. In moments of deep presence, when thought pauses and attention rests, there is a quiet sense of continuity beneath change, a knowing without words. A familiarity deeper than memory. The meeting point between spirituality and quantum physics is not an ideology. It is an invitation to live with less certainty and more sensitivity, less control and more awareness, less fear of not knowing and more openness to mystery. You do not need to resolve the universe. You do not need to define consciousness. You do not need to reach a final answer. Reality is not asking to be solved. It is asking to be experienced. And perhaps the most radical realization of all is this: you are not a seeker moving toward truth. You are the space in which seeking happens. You are the awareness in which questions arise and dissolve. You are not separate from the mystery. You are its expression. When this is seen, even briefly, something relaxes at the core of being. Life continues, challenges remain, Uncertainty persists, but the relationship to all of it changes. You no longer feel opposed to reality. You feel included in it. And in that inclusion, the universe is no longer something you observe from the outside. It is something you participate in from within, moment by moment, breath by breath, awareness meeting itself in form.